Good Saturday morning to you. I'm Danilo Evangelista, and welcome to our weekly tropical weather outlook for today, Saturday, April 11th, 2026. And on this week's tropical weather outlook, we are talking about hurricane season forecasts, which have come out now for the upcoming 2026 Atlantic hurricane season. I'm going to break down what they show, why, and I'm going to show you a little bit of a surprise with one of the forecasts at the end. So you'll want to stay tuned for that. But we have a lot to talk about today, so let's waste no time and let's get started immediately. First off, with probably the biggest hurricane season forecast, which has come out this past week, and that is from Philip Klotzbach at CSU, Colorado State University. They are a very highly respected agency when it comes to releasing hurricane season forecasts on a yearly basis. And what do they show? They have 13 named storms, 6 hurricanes, and 2 major hurricanes with an ACE score they predict this year of 90 ACE. So pretty much to sum up, a below normal hurricane season for the Atlantic. And if you've been following me and following how things have progressed over the last several weeks, you will not be surprised at this forecast. And I'll dive into it a little bit. And we'll dive pretty deeply into why generally why all the forecasts are the way they are this year. But Philip Klotzbach actually says here in his tweet, a high likelihood of robust El Nino and associated with increases in vertical wind shear as the primary factor. As typical, El Nino tends to suppress Atlantic hurricane season activity because we tend to see all of the rising motion and energy focused in the Pacific, and that puts typically puts a lid on things in the Atlantic. Typically. And I'll expand on why I'm kind of trying to allude to something here. But again, you'll have to stay tuned towards the end. But Philip Klotzbach has released his forecast. And as probably one of my favorite things of his forecast is he lists several years, analogs, I should say. He comes up with a list of analogs that closely match what he thinks this year will be like, and he actually uses them as a weighing factor to come up with his forecast. And some of the years he came up with this year's forecast for April. One of them, 2006, 2009, 2015. If you remember that year, that was a big El Nino year. And that definitely kind of clicks in the mind a little bit, especially given that there are a lot of expectations circling social media right now for a potentially big ticket El Nino. A lot of people saying super El Nino. You get the idea. The hype and the expectation for El Nino this year is pretty big. So makes sense that we see 2015 in here and 2023 as well. And that was the last El Nino that we had, really. But that year was an active year in the Atlantic, surprisingly, even though we had a pretty decently strong El Nino that year. But of course, all of the other years in the Atlantic were below normal, so that ended up weighing down the forecast and leading to their numbers that they have of 13.62, which of course is slightly below normal, especially compared to the average that we typically see in the Atlantic, and that is 14 named storms, 7 hurricanes, and 3 majors, and an ACE score of 123. And by the way, what does ACE mean? If you're wondering, why am I bringing up ACE? And that is pretty much the energy output from tropical cyclones, which kind of gives us an idea of the intensity of a season, not just the numbers on paper, because sometimes the numbers on paper mean one thing, but the intensity might be a little different. Like you may not have a super active season, but you had multiple strong storms that lasted for a really long time and were probably very impactful. And so kind of you could almost look as if ACE kind of tells a different side of the story. And that too is expected to be below normal this year. So everything slightly below normal, but also, still kind of near normal. So we're still going to have some activity in the Atlantic. And taking a look at the sea surface temperature anomalies, you could see the Atlantic, yes, we have an El Nino brewing here in the Pacific, And as we've been talking about this for the last several weeks, I mean, you could just see all the heat that's building here off the coast of South America, especially this area here off the Baja Peninsula. And that's definitely a new feature of this year. We have not seen that in many years, especially this very, very warm Northern Pacific look, although it's still not truly a classic positive PDO yet. The way these things kind of work is a little complicated, but we definitely have a warmish Northern Pacific, and as a result, I'm telling you right now, we're probably going to have a really active Eastern Pacific hurricane season this year, and not just that, but the entire Pacific is probably going to be active. So just because of that, once again, as just how the atmosphere works when the energy is concentrated in the Pacific, as it typically is during an El Nino, we see less activity, more higher shear and sinking motion as a result kind of get deposited in the Atlantic, and that definitely puts a damper on things. But I will say the Atlantic as well, not too below normal. I mean, some people are talking about the fact that we kind of have these cooler anomalies here, especially near the Canary Current and off the northwestern coast of Africa, and that it kind of, forms a little bit of what we call the AMO horseshoe. But unlike the last few years, instead of having a very warm horseshoe through here, stretching all the way down from the northern Atlantic down into the tropics, as we've seen over the last several years, this year we have a little bit more of a cooler signature, something we've also not seen in a long time. But I mean, I still think the Atlantic looks decent, and this is probably going to warm up pretty decently over the next several weeks. Number one, at least if you're paying attention to teleconnections, we're probably going to have a change in the pressure pattern in the Atlantic. We're going to go from a positive NAO to a negative NAO. That should hopefully weaken the trades out here, or hopefully, if you're looking for the Atlantic to warm up, and we should probably see some significant warming occur in the Atlantic basin over the next several weeks. And we are now pretty much getting close to mid-April, and so this is definitely going to matter a lot for hurricane season. But still, the Atlantic doesn't look too bad. And really quickly, let's actually take a look at the sea surface temperature anomalies, specifically in the Pacific, especially along the equatorial Pacific here. Nino 3.4 region, that's definitely above normal now, negative 0.2 or positive 0.2 degrees Celsius now. See, I'm so used to it being negative, but now we're getting into the positive, so we're warming up in the Pacific. In the MDR, cooled down, or at least we have cooled down since the beginning of the year, but in recent weeks, you notice here, especially since late March, we've kind of seen a little bit of a rebound in sea surface temperatures. And once again, I think we're probably going to see a pretty decent rebound over the next several weeks, as we probably will get a period of which the tropical Atlantic especially will have an opportunity to warm. And so I guess, maybe Philip Klotzbach is kind of taking that into consideration. I mean, if you actually look as well at the analog years combined, you can see that there is actually somewhat of a warm Atlantic signature here. So I guess he is implying, or if you look at the analogs, they kind of combine together for potentially hinting at the Atlantic still warming up sometime this year. So maybe that might put up some resistance against whatever unfavorable conditions we deal with from the Pacific. I certainly wouldn't be surprised if that happens, but obviously overall you would expect that this year's hurricane season is going to be below normal, especially with the expectation of El Nino this year, in which, by the way, the Climate Prediction Center released their April monthly El Nino diagnostics discussion. That's the official name of it. And officially now, as of April, the Climate Prediction Center now says that ENSO neutral conditions are present. We are no longer in a La Nina. So pretty much they issued their final La Nina advisory. And of course, they have an El Nino watch, as El Nino conditions are probably going to quickly appear over the next several weeks. Probably as soon as the next several weeks, I should say. And if you take a look at their Climate Prediction Center forecast ENSO probabilities. This is an interesting map because this not only shows the probability of ENSO by percentage, but also shows the percent chance of us getting a specific strength of the El Nino. And as you can see here, as we go on into time, first of all, El Nino is very likely. The latest Climate Prediction Center forecast, we now have an over 90% chance of El Nino. So pretty much guaranteed El Nino is going to happen. I think we've established that. But interestingly enough, you see as well the chances of getting a very strong event as well also go up in time. And we even see, especially this dark red color here representing a very strong El Nino, or as some like to call super El Nino, really go up, especially as we get towards the end of the year. So looks like the Climate Prediction Center is really latching onto all of the models and all of the indications that a lot of people have been throwing out, especially in the last several weeks, that looks like this El Nino is going to be pretty strong. But regardless of that, El Nino is almost certainly going to happen now. And again, just taking a look at all of the climate models, especially the models that have come out over the last week or so as we've gotten new climate model data for the month of April. Probably most infamously, the European came out actually, I believe, on Sunday, and this really caused a storm online because look at how strong of an El Nino the European is forecasting. Widespread anomalies here along the equatorial Pacific, upwards of over 2 degrees Celsius above normal. So they are certainly forecasting a super El Nino. So that certainly adds fuel to the fire for that discussion. But also, again, look at how warm the entire northern Pacific is. So the El Nino as a whole will definitely be more coupled this year, especially compared to a year like 2023, where we did have a strong El Nino, but atmospherically we were still kind of all over the place. Not just the Euro, though. The NMME also shows a very strong El Nino. And I mean, both of the models as well. I mean, actually, the European tends to have a pretty aggressive outlook on El Nino, but the NMME is also surprisingly aggressive. And just look at some of these anomalies that they show here, especially, further east along the equator. So I guess the NMME is showing a more east-based El Nino. Bottom line, both of them are very aggressive on El Nino for this year. And it kind of just continues to add on to the pile of evidence that we are definitely headed for an El Nino this year. And we're probably going to get a strong one at that. And so you can already kind of put that into the list of factors for this year's hurricane season. And obviously, El Nino is not a very, very favorable factor. But in the Atlantic, once again, looking at the European seasonal, some people say that this is not a very favorable look for the Atlantic in terms of sea surface temperature anomalies, but it's still not a bad look. We still have some warm sea surface temperature anomalies here throughout portions of the tropics, especially here along the equatorial region of the Atlantic. And that is actually very interesting. Looks like we kind of have an Atlantic Nino setup as well going on. And very interestingly enough, too, very warm sea surface temperature anomalies closer to home in the Atlantic basin as well. And the NMME is kind of showing that too. And especially given the fact of how the pattern usually behaves in an El Nino year, we tend to get a lot of activity that tries to develop closer to home, since it's one of the more favorable areas in the Atlantic basin, especially, displaced away from the tropics, where we tend to see the strongest influence of El Nino. So the fact that the warmer waters are also closer to home this year definitely makes everything all that more interesting when it comes to tracking the Atlantic, because if things develop closer to home, that means we're going to see more activity closer to us. And with that, we're still probably going to get threats for tropical activity. So even if we get an El Nino this year, that does not mean, there's no chance for tropical threats at all. We're still probably going to get them. And in fact, I would be very interested to see if we still might get a significant threat this year. And I mean, it's happened in past years before, where we had a significant storm during an El Nino, most notably and very infamously, one of them being Hurricane Andrew, although some people debate about whether that year was actually an El Nino or not. And even recently, if you go back to 2018, we had Florence and Michael, and yes, 2018 was an El Nino, but it was a little bit of a weird one as well. But even 2015, we had Hurricane Joaquin, which lashed the Bahamas. So, the southeast here tends to be a pretty big hotspot, especially during El Nino years. So the fact that the models are showing very warm SSTs in that region is very much something to keep in mind. But just to kind of, seal the deal here with the El Nino, I want to show you the SOI to kind of give an idea of how the atmosphere is behaving right now. And as you can see here, the SOI has just completely tanked over the last week or so. The latest average of the SOI now, -6 in terms of the 30-day average. And I want to turn on the daily contribution graph here to kind of show you what the daily values, at least over the last 30 days, have been with the SOI. And pretty much since late March, we've been consistently negative. And in fact, take a look at some of these latest 30-day values here, especially over the last several days. We had one yesterday. The daily contribution was -33. So the SOI is crashing. This means that the atmosphere in the Pacific is beginning to respond pretty significantly like an El Nino now. So all systems is a go for El Nino this year. There's really no doubt about that. So, obviously CSU, because of that, forecasts a below normal hurricane season, a slightly below normal hurricane season. But what about the other forecasts that have come out over the past week? Because there's definitely been a few, and all of these agencies, TSR and University of Arizona, which, as you can see here, is especially interesting, but we'll get to that in a moment. But TSR, the forecasting agency out of the UK, they released their forecast on the same day as CSU, by the way, and they forecasted as well a below normal season. In fact, a little bit more leaning into the below normal territory than CSU, with 12 named storms, 5 hurricanes, and only 1 major hurricane. So probably not going to see a lot of intense activity if the TSR forecast comes to pass, although, that actually does remind me. I did see an interesting tweet from Jonathan Morales from the NBC station in Miami, and he did say, very interestingly enough, that he believes that we will still get quite a bit in the way of major hurricane activity this year in general, since the oceans have just been getting warmer over the last several years. And last year is a prime example of that. We had not so active hurricane season on paper, if you look at it, but we still had variety of strong storms, one of them being Melissa, and we had a total of 3 Category 5 hurricanes last year. So we still had quite a bit of intensity, and Jonathan Morales said on Twitter a few days ago that maybe he thinks that we could see something similar to that this year. And the reason why I bring it up is I don't disagree. I mean, just again, looking at the sea surface temperature anomalies here, especially in the Gulf has been very, very warm throughout the entire winter, and we have a lot of these warm sea surface temperature anomalies as well off the southeast coast. So maybe we might get more than one storm that gets lucky and becomes a major hurricane this year. Wouldn't surprise me. But interestingly enough, on the other hand, University of Arizona released their forecast earlier this week. I think this was on Tuesday. And they, for some reason, decided to go with an active hurricane season this year. They forecast 20 named storms, 9 hurricanes, and 4 major hurricanes. So very much a lot like a season like 2023, interestingly enough, which is why, I mentioned 2023 earlier from when CSU brought it up. And I actually have the forecast here from the University of Arizona. And I find this interesting for 2 reasons. Number one, they're the only agency so far that's forecasting an active season. I mean, again, just looking back at the list of all of the agencies so far that have put out their forecasts. We have CSU and TSR both going with a slightly below normal season, but yet University of Arizona going above normal. But second, University of Arizona, I must say, actually has a pretty good track record. I do believe they were as well one of the first forecasts during 2023 to come out and indicate that we're going to have an above normal season. And very interestingly enough, at the very end of their forecast discussion here, they say that the setup feels similar to 2023, though the Atlantic SST anomalies are not as high. Obviously, we had near record-breaking warmth in the Atlantic that year. And they do say, though, that we are going to get a very strong ENSO. And they actually say one of their first sentences here in this paragraph, the big story with the season will be the possibility of a very strong El Nino. In fact, the highest values in the Nino 3.4 region in our model. So they're definitely aggressive on the El Nino. So I guess they're still taking that into consideration. But, and I mean, obviously they know that that's a very surprising thing. But they also mentioned the high forecasted sea surface temperatures in the Atlantic as well. And what I'm talking about high forecasted is their model, because they base their hurricane forecast, I believe, off of a model that they've developed or some sort of data that they've used and they've put together. And they use that as the input for their hurricane season forecast, which once again predicts a very busy season, and also as well ACE of 155, which is near hyperactive level. So definitely a very interesting seasonal forecast from University of Arizona, but especially the high forecasted SSTs part is very interesting, as once again I mentioned, not this graph, this one, the sea surface temperature anomalies in the Atlantic have definitely noticeably rebounded over the last several weeks, especially since mid-March. So are we potentially going to be in for a huge warming period coming up in the Atlantic, especially as we get towards the end of this month in May? And maybe is that what they're expecting, which might have an influence on this hurricane season, which is why they forecast a really active season? Maybe that's the case. And obviously, the last time we saw how, a very warm Atlantic paired with an El Nino in 2023, we still ended up getting an active hurricane season then. And I will say, once again, back in 2023, I do remember the University of Arizona did put out a forecast calling for an active season then. So maybe they could be onto something. We'll see. Certainly, I kind of find it hard to believe that we're going to get 20 named storms as well as, ACE of 155 in a year like this year where we're expecting a strong El Nino. But stranger things have happened. You never know. Sometimes the Atlantic and Mother Nature is going to pull a fast one on us. And maybe it might be this year. But we're all going to find out in just a few weeks from now. And to be specific, 51 days now till the hurricane season, till June 1st, at least in the Atlantic. We're probably even further down the line, especially when you're talking about the Eastern Pacific, which begins on May 15th. So we're all going to find out then, or starting then on June 1st, we're going to see, is this hurricane season going to be below normal? Probably the first below normal hurricane season in a long time. Or is this year going to be yet another active year, despite the fact that all the forecasts are showing potentially a very strong El Nino on the cards? We will see, and I'll be here with you to watch it all as it all unfolds. So, if you want to do that with me, please do me a favor and like this video and subscribe to my channel. We're going to be doing these videos every single week, as we have been for the last several weeks throughout the off season, and we're going to continue to do this every Saturday. And we're going to go over any other forecasts that come out. We're probably going to see more forecasts released over the next several weeks as we're now getting closer towards hurricane season. And I'd expect that most of them will probably be similar to what the CSU shows, but maybe some of them will side more with what University of Arizona shows. We'll see. But with that being said, I'm going to end it off for this week's video. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please leave a like, comment your thoughts below, especially if you are surprised by the University of Arizona forecast and you want to make that known and you want to have a discussion about it. Please do so in the comments. I'll definitely be open to it. But as well, enjoy the rest of your weekend and enjoy your week ahead. Stay safe. Peace, love, and kindness to you all. And I'll be back with more next week.